It is just before dawn on June 30 in 1988. In the Swiss Alps, at a small seminary carved into the hillside above the village of Écon, hundreds of faithful have gathered in the cold morning air. They have come from across Europe, from North America, from South America, from as far as Australia. Some slept in cars, some slept in the surrounding fields. They hold rosaries and missals pressed to their chests. They have been told that something is about to happen that Rome has forbidden, and they have come anyway. If you have found this channel and you feel in your heart that the church is moving through something historic right now, take a moment to subscribe and leave a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from. We are going to need each other for what comes next. Inside the chapel of the Écon Seminary, an old man stands at the altar. He is 82 years old. His name is Marcel Lefebvre, and for the past 20 years he has been at war with Rome. Not a war of weapons, a war of theology, a war over the soul of the Catholic Mass. And on this morning he has decided that the war ends here, not with a surrender, but with an act that the Vatican has explicitly, personally, formally warned him not to commit. He is going to consecrate 4 bishops without a papal mandate. To understand why that matters, why it matters now in 2026, just as it did in 1988, you have to understand what episcopal consecration means in the Catholic world. When a bishop is consecrated without the Pope's permission, he does not simply break a rule. He fractures the apostolic succession. He creates a line of authority that Rome does not recognize. He carves a separate stream in the river of the church. That is why the penalty is not a fine, not a suspension, not a reprimand. The penalty is excommunication, automatic, immediate, reserved to the Holy See itself, meaning that not even a local bishop or a cardinal can lift it, only Rome. Pope John Paul II had written to Lefebvre personally. Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, the future Benedict XVI, had negotiated with him for years, sitting across tables, reviewing drafts of agreements, trying to find language that both sides could accept. On June 29, just one day before the ceremony, Ratzinger sent a final telegram to Écon begging Lefebvre to come to Rome instead and not proceed with the ordinations. The telegram arrived. Lefebvre read it, and on the morning of June 30, he walked to that altar anyway. He spoke before the consecrations began. His words were calm. His voice was that of a man who had made his peace with the consequences of what he was about to do. He told the gathered faithful that the church faced a case of necessity. He told them that 20 years of trying to reason with Rome had produced nothing. He said in his own documented words, "We have done all we could, trying to help Rome to understand that they had to come back to the attitudes of the Holy Pius XII and of all his predecessors." He said the Second Vatican Council had introduced changes that were, in his judgment, not Catholic. He invoked the theological doctrine of a state of necessity, the canonical argument that when the normal law cannot be followed without grave harm to souls, a higher obligation takes precedence. And then he laid his hands on 4 priests of the Society of St. Pius X. Their names are real and documented. Bernard Felay, a Swiss priest, Bernard Tissier de Malrais, a Frenchman, Richard Williamson, a convert from England, Alfonso de Galareta, Spaniard. 4 men, 4 nations, 1 act, all of it conducted in a stone chapel, while the sun rose over the Alps and the Vatican watched in Rome, unable to stop it. The ceremony lasted several hours. Hymns were sung, prayers were offered, the faithful in the courtyard held their breath. By midday on June 30, 1988, Marcel Lefebvre had done what the Pope had told him not to do. He had created 4 bishops outside the apostolic authority of the Holy See, and then the calendar moved. 24 hours later, on July 1, 1988, a document arrived from the Congregation for Bishops in Rome. It bore the signature of Cardinal Bernardin Gantin, the prefect of that congregation, a man of deep personal faith from Benin in West Africa, whose name history would record as the man who cast out Lefebvre. The decree was precise and cold, as official Latin documents tend to be. It noted that Lefebvre had received a formal canonical warning on June 17. It noted that he had ignored repeated appeals to desist. It named the canons of the Code of Canon Law he had violated. Canon 1364, which concerns schismatic acts, and Canon 1382, which concerns episcopal consecration without papal mandate. And then it declared in the language of official Catholic law that Marcel Lefebvre, Bernard Felay, Bernard Tissier de Malrais, Richard Williamson, Alfonso de Galareta, and Bishop Antonio de Castro Mayer, who had co-consecrated alongside Lefebvre, had all incurred excommunication lati sententiae automatically, reserved to the Apostolic See. The decree added a warning to the faithful. Those who supported the schism of Monsignor Lefebvre risked the same grave penalty. It was signed on July 1, 1988. 2 days later, on July 2nd, Pope John Paul II issued a motu proprio, a personal apostolic letter, titled Ecclesia Dei Afflicta. The title translates as the Church of God in Affliction. John Paul described the consecrations as a schismatic act. He used the word affliction not by accident. He was grieving. He had not wanted this. He had extended his hand to Lefebvre for years, and Lefebvre had finally refused to take it. The motu proprio established a new pontifical commission, the Pontifical Commission Ecclesia Dei, to reach out to those attached to the traditional Latin Mass who did not wish to follow Lefebvre into schism, to give them a home inside the Church, rather than forcing them to choose between Rome and tradition. It was a gesture of mercy in the middle of a declaration of rupture. It was one of the most painful institutional acts of John Paul II's long pontificate. Marcel Lefebvre died on March 25, 1991, still under excommunication at his home in Martigny, Switzerland. He was 85 years old. He never reconciled with Rome. He died as he had lived in those last years, convinced that he had done what God asked of him, and trusting that history would prove him right. In 2009, Pope Benedict XVI lifted the excommunications of the 4 surviving bishops, Fele, Tissier de Malires, Williamson, and de Galarreta, as a gesture of good faith toward reconciliation. But the SPX itself never regularized its canonical status. It remained in a canonical gray zone that theologians debated and the faithful found deeply confusing. Tolerated, visited by some popes, but never fully inside the juridical structure of the Church it claimed to serve. And now, 38 years after June 30, 1988, the clock has come back around to the same day of the year. In February of 2026, the Superior General of the Society of St. Pius X, Father Davide Pagliarani, made an announcement that stunned the Catholic world. The Society would consecrate 4 new bishops on July 1, 2026, again without a papal mandate, again invoking the state of necessity, again citing the unchanged theological convictions of the Society's founder. 4 priests were named: Father Pascal Schreiber of Switzerland, Father Michael Goldet of the United States, Father Michel Poinsinet de Sivry of France, and Father Marc Hanapier, also of France. 4 men, 4 nations, 38 years after the first 4. The Vatican responded on May 13, 2026. The warning was unambiguous. The planned consecrations constituted, in the Vatican's official language, a schismatic act. Those who participated would incur the penalty of excommunication. The warning came in the name of Pope Leo XIV, who had been elected in May of 2025, just weeks after the death of Pope Francis on April 21 of that year, and who had taken on the burden of this unresolved fracture almost immediately upon ascending to the throne of Peter. Reports emerged in the Catholic press, from Roret Cayley, from the National Catholic Register, from America Magazine, that Pope Leo XIV had decided to follow what sources described as the 1988 jurisprudence. A decree was being prepared. The language would mirror what Cardinal Gantin signed in 1988. The canonical basis would be the same canons. The penalty would be the same: automatic excommunication reserved to the Holy See. And the date that leaked for the decree was July 1, 2026. The same calendar date as Cardinal Gantin's decree of 1988, 38 years apart, down to the day. The devout Catholics who follow this story are not ignoring that. They are asking questions about it in the quiet hours of the night, in the comment sections of Catholic media, in the WhatsApp groups of traditional parishes around the world. They are asking whether this is a coincidence of ecclesiastical administration, the Vatican simply choosing the same symbolic date to underscore a theological point, or whether there is something in the movement of the Church's history that echoes, that rhymes, that repeats in cycles no human hand fully controls. That is not a question history can answer. It is a question of faith. But consider what is real and documented. Marcel Lefebvre founded the SSPX in 1970, 1 year after Ecumenical Council Vatican II concluded, out of his conviction that something sacred had been lost in the reforms that followed the council. He was not a fringe figure. He had been a missionary bishop in Africa. He had been Archbishop of Dakar. He had been a delegate to the Second Vatican Council itself, sitting in those deliberative sessions, watching the documents take shape. He was not an outsider attacking the church from beyond its walls. He was a man who had given his life to the church and believed with every fiber of his faith that the church was being led away from what it had always been. When he stood at that altar in Econ in 1988, he was not performing a political act. He was performing what he believed was a theological necessity, a rescue operation for the tradition, an act of love for a mass he had watched being pushed aside. Rome disagreed profoundly, permanently, and Cardinal Ganton's signature on July 1, 1988, was the formal expression of that disagreement in the only language canon law offers. Now, in 2026, Davide Pagliarani stands in the same position Lefebvre once stood. He leads the same society. He holds the same theological convictions. He has watched as the decades since the council have continued to pass, as discussions and synods and pastoral experiments have continued to accumulate, and he has found in them no evidence that the society's original concerns were wrong. He announced July 1 for the consecrations. Whether that date was chosen because of its resonance with 1988, or whether it arrived by the ordinary mechanics of scheduling, only Pagliarani knows. But the Catholic faithful notice, the Catholic faithful remember, there are priests inside the SSPX who have privately pleaded for a different path. There are voices in Rome that have expressed grief rather than triumph over what is coming. The Congregation for Bishops under Leo XIV has worked quietly through May and into June of 2026, consulting canon lawyers, reviewing the 1988 documents, asking whether there is any final diplomatic avenue that has not yet been tried. By all accounts that have reached the Catholic press, there is not. The Society has submitted what it calls a declaration of Catholic faith to Rome. Rome has reviewed it, and Rome has found it insufficient, because the fundamental question is not one of faith alone, but of submission to the authority of the Pope. The Society believes that submission can be conditionally suspended when the Pope's direction endangers the tradition. Rome believes it cannot, not under any circumstance, because the principle of papal authority is itself what the tradition requires. That disagreement has not moved in 38 years. It was not resolved when Benedict XVI lifted the excommunications in 2009. It was not resolved during the Francis years, when the Pope granted SPX priests faculties to witness valid marriages and hear valid confessions, a remarkable pastoral gesture that the Society accepted with gratitude while continuing to dispute the canonical terms of its relationship with Rome. It has not been resolved by any of the theological dialogues that followed. Those dialogues produced documents. The documents produced more dialogue. And the fundamental disagreement remained exactly where Lefebvre left it on the morning of June 30, 1988. And so July 1, 2026 approaches the way July 1, 1988 approached, with the parties speaking past each other, each convinced that the other does not fully understand what is at stake for the soul of the Church. What is at stake at its heart is not a procedural dispute. It is a question that runs through every century of Church history. Who defines what the tradition is and who has the authority to change it? Lefebvre believed that authority was bound by the tradition it received, that no pope could alter what had been given, only protect and transmit it. John Paul II and now Leo XIV hold that the authority of the successor of Peter is precisely the guarantee of continuity, that obedience to the Pope, even when the Pope is mistaken in the judgment of his subordinates, is itself a form of faithfulness to the tradition, not a betrayal of it. Both positions reach back into the deepest soil of Catholic theology. Both have their saints and their doctors. That is what makes this wound so hard to close. Marcel Lefebvre is buried at Econ. His tomb is a place of pilgrimage for the faithful of the Society he founded. They come as he came from across the world. They kneel at his grave, and they pray in the same Latin rite he consecrated his life to defending. They do not see themselves as rebels. They see themselves as guardians of something entrusted to them. And in just weeks, 4 of the priests they have trusted and formed and trained will stand at an altar, perhaps the same altar at Econ, though the location has not been confirmed at the time this is being recorded. And they will receive the same laying on of hands. They will become bishops of the Society of St. Pius X, outside the papal mandate, as their predecessors were in 1988. And on July 1, If the reports are accurate, Rome will respond the way Rome responded in 1988, with a decree with names listed, with the severe and ancient penalty of excommunication, lati sententiae. The faithful who love the traditional church will once again be asked to choose. Whom do they follow when the shepherds they trust are pointing in different directions? That is not a question any commentator can answer for them. It is the most intimate question of Catholic life, the question of authority, conscience, and love for the church in its mystery and its suffering. The church has lived with this fracture for more than 50 years, since the liturgical reforms of the Council era began. It has not healed on its own. Whether July 1, 2026 deepens the wound or finally forces both sides towards some resolution that has eluded every previous effort, only Providence can determine. But here's what we know. The dates are real. The documents are real. The 4 names in 1988 are real and verifiable. The 4 names announced for 2026 are real and verifiable. And the same calendar page, July 1 is turning again, the way it turned in 1988, over the Alps, over Rome, over a church that has never stopped being both holy and human, wounded and enduring. Some things in church history do not merely repeat. They complete a pattern that was begun but left unfinished. Whether that is what is happening here, whether these 38 years have been a parenthesis in a sentence that is now closing, is a question the faithful ask in their hearts, in the language that history cannot quite translate. What Archbishop Lefebvre said on the morning of June 30, 1988, was documented, recorded, and preserved by those who were present. He said he was acting out of necessity. He said future generations would understand what he had done, even if Rome would not accept it in his lifetime. He said the church would one day have to reckon honestly with what had happened after the council, and when that reckoning came, those who had held the tradition intact would be seen not as rebels, but as faithful servants. Whether he was right is still as of this day unanswered. What is answered is the date. July 1 in 1988, it was the day Cardinal Gantin's ink dried on the decree that cast Lefebvre and his 4 bishops out of the visible communion of the church. In 2026, it is the day the society has chosen to begin again, and the day Rome appears to have chosen to respond in kind. The calendar knows nothing of mercy or strategy. It simply turns. And on this turn, 38 years later, the same page opens. Whether you believe that is providence or coincidence depends on whether you believe that the church moves through history the way the prophet said. It would tested, wounded, divided, and ultimately undefeated by any rupture human hands can create. That belief is not verifiable by any historian. It is carried quietly in the hearts of the faithful, in the pews of small chapels in Switzerland and France and the United States and Argentina, in the prayers of elderly men and women who have attended the traditional Latin Mass their entire lives, and who are watching right now to see what happens next. They are watching the same way the faithful watched on the morning of June 30, 1988, with grief and with a love for the church that no decree, however grave, has ever been able to remove. If this moved you, share it with someone who loves the church and wants to understand what is happening in these days. God bless you and keep watching.